Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Charter for Compassion special webinar. And today it's one that, as usual, is sponsored by the Charter's Education Institute, but also in conjunction with two of our different sectors, the social justice sector and also the education sector. And we have the pleasure today of being joined by Jordan Hattar. And I met Jordan in March, this past March, in Amman, Jordan. And we were working together at a 3.5-day conference that there were participants, I think, Jordan, from maybe 11 schools from 7 countries. Sometimes I get that mixed up, but it was really exciting because there were delegations of students from these various schools, along with some of their teachers and even administrators, and in some cases, parents. And it was a really working 3.5 days, and with, I think, some exciting outcomes. And I think that's what Jordan is all about. If in Jewish tradition, we always refer to people sometimes being a mensch, and that means that there are 10 individuals who are there to hold up the sky. And so I think that Jordan is one of those mensches, and that he's constantly doing wonderful things. And he's originally from the U.S., and I'm quite certain calls the U.S. his home, from California, and he went to school at the University of California. I can't remember which one of the campuses. Okay, and you know what? Say that again because your voice is kind of low.
Yeah, California State University, Long Beach. So
okay, great. And so, and then he went off to the University of Cambridge and graduated in 2016. And then he found himself at the White House working with Michelle Obama's Reach Higher initiative. And I'll let him talk about that because I'm sure he has a lot to share there. But one of the things that he left the White House and with the past administration in January of 2017. And since that time, he's been afoot, going all over the world. So here, everyone, is Jordan.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Very kind introduction. Hi, everyone. I am in Athens right now. Since January, I've just been speaking from school to school. So I'm speaking at the American Community School here in Athens tomorrow afternoon. I'll share my screen real quick, and so you can kind of see what I share in my talks. All right, can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
So my talk is called Voices of Syria, because when I asked Syrian refugees what they want to tell the world, they said for someone to share our story, for someone to share why we left and what we left. Just a little bit of background, so I'm not this random stranger. That's a picture of my family. I grew up in a town called Templeton in Central Coast, California, in the county of San Luis Obispo, 2 hours north of Santa Barbara. And my younger sister on the far left, Megan, she studies at UC Santa Cruz. Older brother Michael on the far right, he played basketball in Eastern Washington State. And those are my parents and I. And that's a picture, I'm on the right in the number 8 jersey. That's me when I was 12 years old. I wanted to be a professional basketball player to play in the NBA. And I'm actually named after Michael Jordan. My brother's name's Michael. I'm Jordan. And my sister was almost named Ariel, Air for short. So Michael, Air Jordan. So sports were such a big part of my identity. But then when I was 13, Hurricane Katrina hit, and I was in 8th grade. And I would come home from school, turn on the TV, and I would see people on the top of buildings with help signs. There would be helicopters flying over the city. And I later watched a documentary by Spike Lee when the levees broke. And you would see the floating bodies from the people that didn't make it, that didn't get rescued. And I just remember thinking, how could this happen in one of the most prosperous, wealthiest countries in the world? I ended up donating all my money to hurricane relief efforts, but I remember thinking I need to do more, and I didn't even know where my money went. I started high school and I had this teacher, Mr. Levin, and he taught us about the genocide in Darfur. He told us people were being killed because of their ethnicity, but not much was being done. He didn't tell us that we had to do something, but he said people are being killed, not much is being done. So I ended up writing this letter to a newspaper when I was in ninth grade, and here's that article. It got published in our county newspaper, and I share this and I dug this up because I think this is the first time I felt like what we do matters. People stopped only asking about, how many points I scored in a basketball game or how well I did in my tennis match. And they said, I read your article in the Slow Tribune, and I had no idea that a genocide was going on in Darfur. Just a few more pictures. This guy's Deng Jongkut. He's the one I lived with in South Sudan. So the day after I graduated from high school, I went to South Sudan because I wanted to do more than just write a letter to a newspaper or donate money. I really wanted to meet the people and find out what their biggest needs were. Of course, I'm skipping the 1.5 year debate and argument with my parents about trying to go to South Sudan. It was back and forth every single day after basketball practice. And finally, we came to an agreement that if I found a charity to go with, that I could go. I contacted about 20 different charities, and they all told me about the same thing. They said, you don't have the right skills. Come back and talk to us after you finish university, once you graduate from college. But I just kept trying, and I had Carl Wilkins, the one American that stayed in Rwanda, come speak at my school. And he told me, don't give up, Jordan. And I ended up meeting this guy, Deng Jongkut, at a Sudanese Beat for Peace event in San Francisco. And I went with him the day after high school graduation to South Sudan. It was just him, this one American Indian family that supported our trip to build a medical hospital in his parents' village. And I remember we had like $30,000 in a backpack, and we were in Kampala, Uganda, on our way to South Sudan. And Deng asked me if I knew how to build a medical clinic, and I was like, not really. And then I asked him if he knew, and he said, kind of, but let's do some more research. Let's Google it. And I just remember getting so frustrated, and I asked him why he even took me. And he said something I'll probably never forget. He said, we don't always need a specific skill to make a difference in this world, just a heart. We don't always need a specific skill, just a heart, and we can acquire the skills as we go in life. So I promised my parents I would start university after going to South Sudan. I started studying international relations at Cal State Long Beach in Southern California, and we had to pick a language to learn, and so I picked Arabic. And the first Syrian I ever met was my Arabic teacher, the one, she's there with her husband and her 2 daughters. Her name's Iman Hashim. And every day before she would start speaking Arabic, she would speak in English and share what was happening. This was 2011, the Arab Spring. We saw what was happening in Tunisia and Egypt, and sure enough, there were also protests in Syria. But one time I went to get extra credit, go get extra help after class, and she was crying in her office, and I asked her what was wrong, and she told me how the day before, 2 of her cousins were sniped and killed in Damascus as they were helping their neighbor. And I just remember thinking, gosh, someone needs to do something. And I think what resonated so much with me is not only were they the same age as me, I was 19, they were, I think, 19 and 20 at the time, but I've always looked up to the person that helps their neighbor. And I grew up knowing about the story of the Good Samaritan, and I've always looked up to the people that, like Martin Luther King and Gandhi, that dedicate their lives to service. And here, my teacher's 2 cousins were killed as they were helping. we can go in more if you guys are interested in the background of Syria, but I share this slide because many people know about Hamza because he was featured on BBC, The Guardian, all the world news, but people know that he was the 13-year-old boy that was tortured by the Syrian government. But what they don't know are some of the stories that his family told me. I met his family in the refugee camp, in the Zaatari refugee camp in northern Jordan. And they said Hamza was the type of guy that if someone didn't have lunch money at school, he would give his own lunch money. If there was a poor person on the street, he would tell his mom, we need to give them 100 lira to make sure they have something to eat tonight. And so I think it's obvious that Hamza had his life taken from him too early. But I think what I'm also starting to realize is that Hamza's life was also taken from us. I think about if Hamza was alive today, he would be 19. And I wonder, what were his hopes and dreams? What would he be doing? What university would he be going to if he was alive? And so I took a semester off university in 2012. And 3 or 4 times a week, I would go to the Zaatari camp that had just opened along the Syria-Jordan border. And so it's 7 miles from Syria. And I needed to be official, so I had my friend create a website for me, helpforrefugees.org. And when I got to the camp, this is what I saw. There was 3 inches of water throughout the whole camp. My friend took this picture. And I would go around the camp as a freelance journalist because that was the only way in the camp. Either I had to work for the UN or be a journalist. And I had done model journalism with Model United Nations at college. So I thought, well, I guess that's going to be my way in. So I was a journalist for my little initiative, Help for Refugees. And I would go around the camp asking refugees, what do you want to tell the world? And what are your biggest needs? And the story that sticks out the most is when I asked one woman what she wanted to tell the world. She looked at me and said, to know that I could be your mom. And then she turned to her 2 daughters who were 11 and 8 years old, and I remember they were waving, and she said, to know that those could be your sisters. And then she turned to her son who was in the corner, maybe 5 years old, and she said, to know that that could be your brother. And it made me think about how we're all part of the same shared humanity. It made me think of Martin Luther King's favorite poem by John Donne, an old British poet. He says, no man is an island entire of himself. Every person is a part of the continent, a part of the main. And then he ends the poem by saying, any person's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. So don't sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. And to me, the reason it made me think of that is because we can distance ourselves from what's going on in the world. But I do think we're all interconnected, and we can push, the suffering and everything away, but someone else's suffering, I think, does affect us. I won't share this documentary clip, but I can send it over later. It's this PBS Frontline documentary, Syria Behind the Lines. And I share that one because it's very similar to what all the footage was of the Syrian refugees as they left their homes, as their houses were being bombed. And I remember Syrian refugees showing me this footage, sometimes even on their iPhone. And I remember thinking, well, because Steve Jobs, his father, his biological father is from Syria, from a city called Homs. And most of the refugees in that camp weren't from Homs, but a few of them were. And the ones that were from Homs, and they're showing me this footage, and I'm thinking, the next refugee could be the next Steve Jobs. And it was just chance. It's just kind of chance where we're born. After 3 months, so my first time I was in the camp, I was there for the majority of 3 months, going back and forth between the camp in the north and the capital. But I've taken about 10 different trips. I was just there this past month as well. But the first time I came back to the US, everything changed because I had new friends that were doctors in Syria. And I remember learning the story of Amina. Sorry. And Amina was a 17-year-old girl. She was a student nurse, and she could have left Syria to go to Lebanon or to Turkey, but instead she stayed in Syria to help the few doctors that are left. And a doctor with the Syrian American Medical Society told me that she died in this bombing. And I was just so frustrated at the world. How could this happen? We'll never get Amina back. And then I turned to my mentor, Carl Wilkins, the one that was in Rwanda during the '94 genocide, and I asked him, I don't know how to get over this. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing what we'll ever be able to do to get Amina back. And he reminded me that the courage and inspiration that Amina had, that it'll always be more powerful than those that bombed this hospital. The courage and strength she has, that'll always be stronger than those that try to inflict harm in our world. And so he said, we have to love the beauty more than we hate the evil. We have to love the beauty more than we hate the evil. And I was like, Carl, what do you mean by that? And he didn't really tell me. But for me, I think that means deciding what our choices are gonna be and what we're gonna focus on in this world. And so I just wanted to share Alex's story. I wonder how many of you guys are familiar with Alex. He was, now he's 7. He was 6 years old last year. And he saw, like many of us, he saw the boy in the back of the ambulance in Aleppo. His name was Omran, a 4-year-old boy. And after seeing that picture, he wrote first a letter, and then he made this video to the world and to President Obama. Let's see. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. Can you guys still see my screen all right? Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Obama, remember the boy who was picked up by the ambulance in Syria? Can you please go get him and bring him to our home? Park in the driveway or on the street, and we'll be waiting for you guys with flags, flowers, and balloons. We will give him a family, and he will be our brother. Catherine, my little sister, will be collecting butterflies and fireflies for him. In my school, I have a friend from Syria, Omar, and I will introduce him to Omar, and we can all play together. We can invite him to birthday parties, and he will teach us another language. Since he won't bring toys and doesn't have toys, Catherine will share her big blue strawberry white bunny, and I will share my bike. I will teach him how to ride it. I will teach him
addition and subtraction. Those are the words of a 6-year-old boy. He teaches us a lot. The humanity that a young child can display, who hasn't learned to be cynical or suspicious or fearful of other people because of where they're from or how they look or how they pray. We can all learn from Alex.
Alex, 6 years old.
And so I share, well, first off, that's always the best part of my day, just seeing how Alex responds. But I had friends in the White House that saw that it was a letter before it was a video. And I remember Alex's parents were contacted. And we found out that Alex didn't even get help with this letter. This was just the natural reaction of a 6-year-old boy. And if you look up the letter, you'll see it's just like one run-on sentence. There's not many periods or commas. And it just makes me think that compassion is in our DNA. This is perhaps how we're wired to respond. So I don't think it's just Alex's choice. I think it's also our choice. Are we going to respond to the refugee crisis, and not just to the refugee crisis, but anyone that's considered to be the other, to be different than us? Are we going to respond with fear and close our hearts and minds? Or are we going to respond with compassion and empathy and be our brother and sister's keeper, like Alex? This was a school I was speaking at in Prague, Czech Republic. And it was a bunch of, I think these were the 8 and 9-year-olds. And I remember I showed that video by Alex, and everyone raised their hand afterwards. And I was like, I'm not really taking questions, and none of them put their hands down. And so we just went around the room. And I remember one 8-year-old girl said, you know, if Alex can make that much of a difference and he's 6, he's like an adult, and my parents are so much older, think about how much of a difference they can make. That was something that really stuck with me. I could go on, but I'll just share a couple more stories and then just hear from what you guys want to hear about. I mean, I was just struck by the hospitality that I was shown by the Syrians. They would share their refugee rations with me. They would only at the beginning get a few juice boxes. This was right when the camp opened in 2012. And I remember they would share their juice boxes with me. They would put it in front of me, and I would say, no, I've had enough to eat and drink. And then they would poke the straw in the juice box and just hold it there until I took it. And that's just the image I have now of Syrians. When I think about Syria now, I think about this family. I think about Elham, the lady on the far left with the headscarf, and her daughter, that's Jinnah, and the boy in the front left, his name is Zaid. He's a big troublemaker in the camp. The guy to his right is Mahmoud. He loves to sing. His dad behind him in the yellow jersey, his name is Anas, and he loves Manchester United. And it really just broke down the stereotypes I had of refugees, just meeting the people, learning their stories. It made me want to do something. So after learning their stories, I ended up fundraising for these caravans. They're basically just box houses, prefabricated housing units. And I ended up fundraising for caravans because that's what refugees said they needed the most, besides going back to Syria. And I didn't know how to help them get back to Syria. And so my friends and I ended up fundraising for 2 of these caravans. And then something incredible happened, and students in Buffalo, New York heard about that, what we were doing, and they fundraised $3,000. And then another group of students at the Summer Institute for Human Rights and Genocide Studies, also in Buffalo, they fundraised $3,000. And so we got 2 more caravans to the camp. And right after I graduated, I helped deliver those. I won't share, we have a video clip of the caravan delivery, and that's, I'm trying to think how to show that. I can maybe show that if you guys are interested in a little bit, but it's in Jon Stewart, the former host of The Daily Show. It's in his new documentary called After Spring, which is on iTunes and Amazon. And After Spring meaning after the Arab Spring. But in the clip, you'll see the boy in the left with me. His name is Munir, a 14-year-old boy. And he was shot by a government sniper as he was walking from his house to go buy bread. So the UN prioritized getting him into one of these caravans. someone who works in international development told me that delivering these caravans is just a drop in the ocean. And when I look at the whole refugee crisis, I mean, I can really see his point. This is just the refugee camp that we delivered the caravans in. It took me 4 hours to bike. One of the refugees let me borrow his bike, and we biked around the whole camp. It took about 4 hours. It's a city, basically. But then my Jordanian friend, she showed me this picture, and she said, yeah, it might just be a drop in the ocean, but that one drop can be someone's whole ocean. And she said, think about the impact that the students in New York were able to, what impact they were able to have in Munir's life. And I've been able to stay in touch with Munir and his father, and they've told me about how that caravan was able to get them out of the refugee camp. It got them a little bit better life, a little bit more financial mobility. And so my message is really, I think the best way to make a difference is to follow our hearts, to follow our dreams. And this past year, I was doing my master's degree in international relations at the University of Cambridge. And I was studying genocide, and it's an intense topic. So I took a week break, and I checked out this book called The Alchemist. And it's now my favorite book. The main character, Santiago, he says, the secret of life is to fall down 7 times and get up 8. And actually, I had applied exactly 7 times to intern in the White House. And I ended up applying an 8th time because of that book. And on the 8th time, I ended up getting in. And then, I share that because I think following our hearts, following our dreams, requires persistence, never giving up. And then I think the last thing that following our hearts requires is illustrated in this quote, if you guys want to take a second to read. And I share this quote because I think ever since I was 13 or 14, the whole world has told me what I should care about, what I should be doing. But I think it's up to us to fearlessly create our own paths in this world, and to not let anyone tell us that what we care about is not worth pursuing. And so it doesn't have to be the refugee crisis, but whatever you care about most, I would just say just to fearlessly follow it. And so to end, I would say that the best way to make a difference is to find out where our greatest passion intersects with the world's greatest need. So asking ourselves, what do we care about most, and how can that make a difference in the world and contribute to our world? That's about all I have, Marilyn. Yeah.
Well, I think that's quite a bit, Jordan, and I know that you have a lot more. And I am remiss because at the beginning I should have reminded people that if you take your cursor and move it towards the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll find that there's a chat box there. Some of you have already found it. There's also a question and answer box. And so really invite people to give us their comments. And there is one from Madar, and he's sending it to you, Jordan, in particular, I'm sure. And he says, I'm glad to know and experience that there are so many good souls working towards a better world. And so I said in the beginning that you were Mensch, and you are an ambassador. You're a compassion ambassador. And anyone who's on this call, if you can think of ways to bring Jordan to your community to tell not only the story about the Syrian refugees, but his work in the Sudan. And just, I think, from our own experience of being together for a few days of working with 250 students, just that experience, the honor of being with youth who really care. This was a group of students, as I mentioned in the beginning, from 11 different schools who came together for a compassion summit. in Amman, Jordan, and we worked with Syrian refugee children. And in my case, I was able to go out to the camps to visit some of our partners in the area as well. And it is an honor because it's an invitation to really, I think, challenge your own experiences, your own area of wisdom, and it broadens your perspective. So I think it is such a gift that Jordan is giving to us, and such a gift that he's giving to folks with whom he works, but at the same time, all of the gifts of presence, Presence, that they're giving to him. So here is another comment, and from SWBA, I think. Well done, Jordan. It's inspirational. So I'm wondering if anyone else has any questions of Jordan, and or some additional comments. And Jordan, maybe while people are thinking, I'm wondering if you can give them kind of an overview of where you might be going in the world over the next couple months. And also, what is it when you get to a school? Is it just that you talk? I know it's more than that, but maybe you can share that with people.
Yeah, it's been a variety of things. I was just at this all-girls school, St. Mary's Colne in England, and I spoke just to their sixth form, which is like their juniors and seniors, back in May, and then they invited me back in front of all their parents, and it was this incredible evening. I was just part of it. They had poetry reading, letter reading, singing by the junior choir, and then I Skyped in one of my doctor friends. He's in Idlib, Syria right now, and they need some help with their midwife training facility and their nursing school because a lot of the doctors have left Syria. And so it was incredible just to put that human touch to the Syrian refugee crisis. But I do a variety of things. I've done like service workshops, speaking to schools, and then breakouts in classrooms. So I'm not limited to any one, platform. But my main goal is to put a human touch to the refugee crisis. The reason I started doing this after I left Mrs. Obama's office was it just made sense. It was like I felt like I had to counter what a lot of the politicians and media were saying about refugees, because not that I felt like I had an agenda myself, but all my experiences just countered that. The three biggest misperceptions I would say are that refugees take people's jobs, that they're a burden on society, and that they just want to inflict harm on the West. And one little quick story, when I asked refugees what they needed most, Marilyn, they said shaving razors. And I was like, why do you need shaving razors? And they said, because we don't want to look like Daesh, because we don't want to look like ISIS. And they said, in the West, everyone's saying that we support ISIS. They said, we're as against ISIS as you are, but we're not with the Syrian government either. It's not a two-side conflict. That was a story that stuck out.
Here's, you have a number of questions. So the first one, very practical one from Colette Fitzgerald. How can you financially support yourself while working to help others in the world?
I started this out in January, and I didn't even know I was going to be doing it full time. I thought maybe a couple weeks. And it was kind of like word of mouth from school to school. And then once a couple schools started telling other schools, I had enough schools to speak at. And a lot of the schools I've been speaking at are international schools, embassy schools. And so I'm fully funded by the schools I speak at, helping out with airfare and lodging, whether it be a hotel or just an extra room in someone's house. And then so that's kept it going. And what I often do is I can find one school to speak at that can help financially make the trip happen. And then I can reach out to all other schools in an area. But yeah, it's been incredible. I never saw this happening.
Great. Shelley Harris has asked, she's thanking you, but what would you say has been your greatest hurdle personally and professionally?
Well, professionally, getting the caravans into the camp. I remember I fundraised with a group of students with this group called Syria Deeply, and we fundraised $15,000, and I was so happy. And then none of the money we fundraised went towards caravans. So the organization basically said, we're just going to donate it to the general UN fund. And I was just so frustrated. And I remember my dad saying, if we want to make sure something gets done, sometimes we have to do it ourselves. And so I took that as my friends and I need to do it ourselves. So we got those first 2 caravans. But I was devastated after all that money didn't go towards what we wanted it to go towards. And then as far as personally, sometimes, there was a point when learning the stories was really, really intense. And, Carl, the guy that's my mentor, he often talks about secondary trauma. And that's often why I don't share some of the footage anymore at schools. But you got you're learning these stories and it's real. You see this woman that is in the camp and you're just talking to her and she just covers up her head and grabs her 2 kids and you have no idea why she's doing that. And then 10 seconds later, you hear this faint helicopter in the background, but you're in a safe country. There's no threat. But seeing how the effects of war have had just on the common person. This camp, when I got there, was 75% women and children. And I think this idea of who a refugee is, just seeing it be someone that it could be us in that person's shoes. That really was tough to, still is, but I think this is part of how I can respond, I think, sharing some of these stories.
Right. There's a comment from Maria, and she's saying hi to you and thanking you for this inspiration and for what you're doing. And she said, I'm from Nigeria, and the Nigerian government is holding the southeast part of the country under siege. How can the world community hear about this? The Southeasterns are only asking to be granted their own country, Biafra.
I remember hearing everything that was happening in Syria, but I felt like the world wasn't hearing it. And I remember I ended up, these same stories that I shared today, I would just contact every single news agency, and about 6 months, no one took anything. Finally, BBC said, we'll give you 2 minutes. I said, oh, that's fine, that's more than enough. And they kind of did an initial interview to see who I was and what I was going to say. And of course it's not live, so there's a 10-second or 20-second drag. So they just were finally like, okay, we'll let this guy on. We don't have many people covering this story. And we ended up having 40 million listeners, and they ended up inviting me back, and we had 300 million on Friday prime time. And so I would say just persistence on getting the story out there. And then trying to, Maria, I would say the other thing is personal relationships, people that already know your mission in this world and why it's so important that this, gets to the world, and kind of thinking about who can help affect that change. The reason I didn't stay in the White House, for example, is because I didn't know if that was the best way to change everything with the refugee crisis. And so I had to make a decision. Am I going to try to make changes outside of government or within government? So I would just say, it's tough, but, and also one other thing I would say is numbers. When I would share refugee numbers, people didn't care as much. I think people are really inspired and move when they hear stories. And so thinking about how in a short video or something, we can capture the message that you want to share with the world. And I'd be happy. I was actually just at St. Mary's, the school, and I think one of the two most powerful women in Nigeria, her daughter was one of the ones that helped organize this. So I know that's something small, but I'd be happy to send it over to that girl and say, hey, can you share this with your mom? This is one of the grievances of someone that from Nigeria. And so I think just looking at who our contacts are, and then just not giving up, just trying 20 different ways to do something.
There is another message from Adar and says, based on your experience, can you comment what challenges could be there for a similar help and support group working in a demography like Myanmar?
I might want to read that just so I can.
It's under the questions.
Oh, that's a good question. You mind? I couldn't find it. Do you mind?
Yeah, it says, based on your experience, can you comment what challenges could be there for a similar help and support group working in a demography like Myanmar?
I don't know too much about Myanmar, but one thing I really believe in is the power of presence, just being present in an area and listening. I think when I first got to the refugee camp, I didn't know what to do other than just to try to follow in what Eleanor Roosevelt always did, and she used to go on listening tours around the US. And I think what happened, I didn't know it at the time, is I think learning people's stories empowers service. We find out what to do after hearing people's stories, and you build those relationships. And now in the camp, any day I can just call one of my friends, and he's not a refugee anymore to me, he's a friend, and he'll tell me exactly what's happening in southern Syria or in the camp. So what happened is spending hundreds of hours with the people, just not having an agenda myself, really makes the whole conflict, this crazy Syrian conflict that I don't know how any one person can understand, but I do feel like I have an understanding of it because of all those hours with the refugees. And I hope that can be applied to your question a little bit.
I agree. The importance of listening can't be underestimated, and how important it is, because once we get those stories, we have a decision to make. And our decision is, are we going to act on those stories because we feel them in our heart, or are we going to put them aside? And either choice becomes an action that we make. And Madar, I know that, we are so far in terms of coverage from being able to listen to stories from Myanmar. And, that is an interesting thing, Jordan, that you bring up. What can an organization like Charter for Compassion do to begin the process of collecting those stories? We have a few partners in Myanmar. Maybe it's time that some of us really begin to find out how we can collect those stories and get them in front of people. There are a lot more things here, and their message is primarily for you, Jordan. Michael Burks, who's the lead coordinator for our social justice sector, wants to just kind of thank you for bringing all of this to the forefront and the work that you're doing in the world. And Shelley Harris is very pleased that you have a mentor and how important a mentor is. And, take care, she says. I'm sure what she's also saying is that your kind of energy and involvement really ripples and brings about change in the world. There's a huge question here, and I think we have time for it, certainly. Can you tell us more about your experiences in South Sudan?
Yes, that's something I don't, I'd love to share more about that. I think I was just this, as far as academically, just this average, student in high school. I remember my GPA was 3.3, so that's B's, C's, a couple A's. And I think, looking for meaning in this world, looking for what's important in life. And I remember meeting this boy, this 3-year-old boy that was bit by a scorpion on the bottom of his foot. And he was fading in and out of consciousness. And I called a doctor in California, and we found out that the nearest antivenom was too far away. And so it was basically 50% chance he survived, 50% chance he died. And he ended up surviving. Maru is his name. But a lot of people in his village have died of so many similar things. At the time, 1 in 5 children didn't make it to the age of 5. It's gotten a little bit better statistically. But what it did is it made me realize how precious life is, and how I could have been born in his shoes and he could have been born in my shoes. And it's just really chance where we were born. South Sudan at the time, so this was 2010, before it was an independent country. What we've seen since with the medical hospital is, there's been conflict within South Sudan between the Nuer and the Dinka people. But this area also, it's so rural. And I just remember thinking, I would ask people, they wouldn't even know what World War II was. And I thought that was, it's such a different world. Yet it's also in our world. And I remember wondering, do we want South Sudan to become, because I remember seeing a lot of Western development taking place in South Sudan. Jimmy Carter was there during the referendum in 2011. A lot of publicity going to South Sudan. But what Deng's taught me is we need to listen to what the people in South Sudan say they need the most. Listening to what they say they need, not what we think they need. So he was another big mentor. I didn't share this, he walked over 1,000 miles when he was 5 years old to give him political asylum to the US, known as one of the Sudanese Lost Boys. Deng's just this amazing and courageous man. And so he's taught me that we need to make sure that South Sudan is at the center of rebuilding South Sudan. And I remember this is what he did. This is why I would sit for hours in the Syrian camp. We would just sit there with the village elders talking about what the biggest needs were. And I remember almost every week it was health and education, because those are the primary needs. I don't know where you wanted, if there's something specific in South Sudan, but Maru and Deng are the people I think about when I think about South Sudan.
There's another question here from Michael Burks, and he wants to know, how do you keep from being discouraged?
Oh, Michael, I wish I could take you on some of these speaking tours. It's just incredible. It's the most inspiring, fulfilling thing I've ever been a part of. Whether it's this 5-year-old student in Moscow, Russia, that hands me all her money and she said, this is for whoever needs it the most in Syria. Or, there are just countless stories of students that come up to me and the things that they say, and it makes me know that the world's in good hands for the future. And I think we're at a very important time. At least I feel like this is the most important time in my life to decide where our world goes. Are we gonna let fear win, or are we gonna let the compassion in us have a say? And so I get to see the incredible compassion and empathy that students around this world have for others. I could send you this 3-minute video clip. I didn't get to share it today, but it's a 3-minute video. I think I shared this with you, Marilyn. It's what students are saying all around the world. They sent me second video clips on what they think about refugees. So it's the students definitely that keep me going.
Jordan, I'm wondering if we can send out some of these links to folks who are on this webinar. So if you could just send them to me, we'll make certain that everyone gets them. The other one, and I don't know if you have it, but the UNICEF did the most incredible video that we were fortunate enough to see in Amman about the Syrian refugee children. And I don't know if you have access to that. I think it's one of the most powerful things that I've ever seen. So, we should try and track that down.
Okay. And there's also this really good one that The Guardian put out of this 20-year-old girl named Rania. And what's incredible about that is you see Rania with, she just looks like a typical American college student. She decides to pack, The Fault in Our Stars in what she's going to bring on the boat crossing over to Europe. And I think just, seeing her, listen to carpool karaoke and stuff, it just reminded me how our similarities are greater than our differences. So yeah, we'll have to send those videos to, yeah.
Okay. There's a wonderful reflection, comment, question. Do you have a charge, CHARGE, to our high school students about to graduate? What would be your message?
Just to do what you love most in this world. I really mean that when I say follow your dreams, because I think everyone's got, maybe they care. We all care about some, what matters to us most. It's like we have to find and follow our passion, and I think that's really important to find out what path and how can we live a fulfilling life. How can we, as Angelina Jolie put it, how can we live lives of service? How can we be of use to others? And we're all going to have something different that we care about, perhaps, but figuring out how that can add to this world, it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever been a part of. And I think one thing we really need is just to never give up. And the most fulfilling, rewarding things in this world for me have been because I've tried 20 times. I remember sitting there the first day in the White House and I was like, it's only, if I wouldn't have tried an 8th time, it's like just about never giving up. And I think that's really how we can achieve the most in this world. And realizing the last thing, Marilyn, and I would say is is what my sister told me. She said, when I almost didn't deliver the caravans because I thought, well, why should I choose which families get these caravans? The UN told me we can't decide. We don't have a process in place. I'm like, you're the UN, you should have a process in place. They're like, nope. And I remember my sister told me, just because we can't do everything doesn't mean we don't do something. And there's a club at Hamburg High School in upstate New York, and they had a club that fundraised for one of those caravans, and their slogan was, "What we do matters." And after these students fundraised those 2 caravans, governments from around the world gave 20,000 caravans. And so I don't know if it was because of the students, but they were some of the first ones to get caravans into the camp. So what that reminds me is that our actions do have ripple effects, and nothing's ever too small. Things, if that drop really does make a difference.
Yeah, it reminds me of bringing things down to the lowest common denominator. So often when I think about a $3,000 home, I think about how many cups of coffee is that. And at today's rates in some of our countries, it's not too many. There are a couple other messages, a lot of thank yous, a lot of gratitude for what you've done and admiration. And from Hannah, I'm sorry, I'm facing the sun, which doesn't happen very often in the Northwest. But it says, this has been amazing. Thank you, Jordan. I cried all the way through your talk. It opened my heart. What could be better in a way to end this? And I think that, again, you are a wonderful ambassador of compassion and of action, compassionate action. And, you know, I don't think that we could say thank you enough. One of the things is we will get a message out to everyone who registered for this webinar. Jordan will help us with adding some of the additional links. This time, this has really been recorded, and we'll give you that link as well, so that if any of you have any influence to bring someone like Jordan to your community, one of your schools, I know that he would appreciate that. And so, you know, we will definitely, and Jordan has just already sent you his email address directly, jordan.help with the number 4 refugees@gmail.com. I wanted to remind people that our webinars are frequent. You can find them in our newsletters, and there's always an opportunity for you to help us pay for the platform so that we can get these webinars to you almost weekly, and sometimes bi-weekly, and sometimes even tri-weekly. So check out the newsletters, check out the homepage on the charter. We always have things listed on the right-hand column so that you can kind of help tune in and keep these things going for everyone. I want to put a bug in your ear just as we're closing, and that is next year is going to be a big year for the Charter for Compassion. It's our 10th anniversary. From the time that Karen Armstrong was the very first person to receive the TED Award. And we're planning some big things for next year. And we just want you to kind of help us think what some of those big things are. And so if you have any ideas, like for example, having people like Jordan be an ambassador for compassion and compassionate action, if you're thinking of a webinar or an individual that you would love to see as a part of these conversations, please let us know. We would really, really appreciate it. And anyone on this call who wants to get involved with the Charter at almost any level, from helping to build a compassionate city to saying thank you to all the people who send us messages. Help is needed in every direction. Thanks so much again, Jordan, and thank you everyone who was on the call today. Take care.
Thanks for
Bye.
listening.